We acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, the gathering grounds of many diverse First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples whose footsteps have marked this land and whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community.
Hello, and welcome back to Research Recasted, the Knowledge Mobilization podcast. I'm your host, Kelsey Howlett, and today we are joined by Dr. Melissa Hills. Dr. Melissa Hills is a molecular biologist and associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences. She is engaged in the scholarship of teaching and learning, an interdisciplinary area of research investigating teaching and learning in post-secondary education. In 2024, she was named a MacEwan University Chancellor's Research Chair and was awarded a Distinguished Teaching Award. Well, hello, Melissa. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here and to meet you, Kelsey.
Yeah, no. So first off, I want to congratulate you on your Chancellor's Research Chair.
Thank you so much.
And I want to start by asking you, what sort of impact has this position had on your research here at MacEwan?
Yeah, so the Chancellor's Research Chair is a 2-year award, really. So this is my first year, but I have next year as well, which is, really great because it gives you, I think, that first year to kind of, build a foundation and lay the land, or at least this is how I'm sure different people will organize their work in different ways. But for me, having the 1 year, I'm really using it as an opportunity to kind of diversify my research and to build connections and to develop new collaborations. And then I'm really hoping next year is where we get to hit the ground running and make a lot of progress. So I think, first of all, the fact that it is a 2-year position makes a huge difference. And with the Chancellor's Research Chair, we get teaching release. A big feature of that is having reduced teaching, which, on one hand, I'll be honest, I'm really missing teaching. We're still teaching 3 courses a year, which, a lot of research-intensive universities, that can even be a high teaching load, but usually we teach 6. But having that down to 3 carves out a lot of time that you can focus on your research and really make progress. It can be really difficult to really move things along when you have a really heavy teaching load. And so to have that dedicated time set out to really just move things along, to spend time writing, to spend time planning, to spend time applying for grants, to spend time building collaborations is just so incredibly valuable. And so, again, and to have that over 2 years is such a gift from the university. And then, of course, it does come with some funding as well. So I have this opportunity to fund a student, and also I'm going to go to a conference in November, which will be wonderful. And so there's that built into it as well. But I think more than anything, that dedicated time to just build your research program is such a wonderful opportunity for me.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so you talked about diversifying your research and creating new collaborations and new connections and stuff. So what is the research that you are doing with this Chancellor's Research Chair?
Okay, so the research, and maybe I'll start at the beginning. So
of course.
In 2023, I got some funding to hire students, and I hired students to be partners in a project that was both research and it was curriculum development. And so students as partners is actually quite a large area of research. There's journals entirely dedicated to students as partners. It's recognized as a really valuable opportunity for students to be engaged in meaningful research, but also for faculty to advance their research and to learn from students. And so in 2023, I hired 2 students, so Lauren DeKalsick and Sam Dancy, and they came on as partners in a project where we were investigating barriers to student learning in a biology lab. And so the biology laboratory, as I think probably not everybody listening has been in a biology lab, but when you're in a biology lab, and you're taking coursework there, it's a very unique environment. It's different from your standard lecture course. You're in a different physical environment. There are a lot of time pressures because you're doing experiments that have to be finished. You're being introduced to all kinds of different skills. You're learning as you go. It's very technical. The protocols you're following are very detailed and complex. And so it can be a very challenging learning environment, I think, for a lot of students. And so Lauren and Sam and I were working together to try to figure out what were the barriers to students, like where were students being frustrated, or what were the things that maybe were undermining their successful accomplishment of the learning goals for that lab. And then we wanted to use that understanding of what those barriers were to redesign the lab curriculum and make it more inclusive for greater diversity of students, to try to mitigate those barriers, try to create learning resources that would help students so more students could be successful. And I would say also so more students could just enjoy that learning experience, because sometimes the biology lab can be a really stressful part, and we don't want that. You want also students to be engaged, because when students are having fun in that learning environment, they're learning better as well. Yeah. And so they came on with me on that project. And so really my Chancellor's research chair is building on that. And not only am I interested in biology labs, I also think that what we're learning about the biology labs are probably very relevant to other science labs. So, chemistry, for example. So I'm interested in other science labs and whether the kinds of barriers and things that we're learning in biology are also transferable to other science labs. But then I'm curious too about how those things transfer to other experiential learning environments. And so there are a lot of different experiential learning type courses across MacEwan and in higher education broadly. So we could think about something like nursing, clinicals, or practicums in social work, and many others. And so I think when I think about the research chair, it's really this opportunity not only to build on that science lab project that's at the core of my research chair application, but also to form collaborations with people in other disciplines and other areas of the university, and even potentially external to the university, and look at whether we can identify what barriers exist more broadly, what are maybe common themes, and what can we be doing just to ensure that students are having better learning experiences and being more successful in achieving the learning goals that they have and that we have for them.
Wow. I love hearing about research that is geared towards helping students learn, because we're all so different, right? And not everybody learns the same way. So the fact that there is research being done in this area, I find absolutely incredible. Just to go back to the students a little bit, because you said that you worked with two of them. Were both of these students, like students in biology, having to take these labs?
Yeah, so another thing that I have prioritized, my research leading up to now, but also, the plan moving forward is to continue working with students as partners. So they're research assistants, technically that's their job title, but I think really they're partners and they play a real leadership role. And so Lauren and Sam brought, so much insight into this project. Both of them are amazing, smart, hardworking. They have such insight. But another incredible value of working with them is that they had recently completed the lab that we were examining. Oh. And so we collected data from students who had taken the lab. So we surveyed all of the students who completed that lab. And I've done that again this year. And so we did a survey and we got feedback from students generally about what their learning experiences were. But they also had this unique individual insight as well. And my priority is working with students with disabilities on these projects. And so, there's kind of a saying that says nothing for us without us. So make sure that you're including the voices of the marginalized people that you're trying to work for or do things for in the work and in the discussion in a meaningful way. And so both Lauren and Sam also have experiences of different disabilities that created additional challenges for them in the biology lab. I have ADHD, so I can look back to my experiences in the biology lab, and I can also point it at barriers that I face. And so that was really important as well. And so not only their personal experiences of disability, but also the fact that that lab was still fresh in their mind as students really helped, because they were able to sit down and go like, oh, I remember this lab. This was so overwhelming, or I was so stressed out, or I didn't know what to do. And it really helped us when we went to redesign the curriculum, that personal insight. And, it was a real reminder for me that it has been so long since I've been a student. I'm learning all the time, but it's been a really long time since I sat in a lab with a lab instructor at the front of the room telling me like, you're going to need this pipette and you're going to do that. That is all a distant memory for me. And so the gift of students is that's not like they're in the classroom, and also they're not just in my classroom. They've got perspectives from all these other courses they're taking as well. And so they're able to come in and say, I took this other lab and they did this and it was so helpful to me. Or I took this other lab and they did this and it made it even more challenging for me. And so their individual perspectives, I think, really enriched the project and made it so much better. I learned so much more. I learned so much from them. And I think that the things that we did in making changes to the lab were much better because of their involvement.
Yeah, like you said, like it's been a while since you've sat
so long
in a classroom. So not only is like the memories aren't fresh, but I'm sure that so much has changed. Absolutely. In the way that they do things, and having those students that can that are there, that are doing it, I'm sure was like invaluable.
Yeah, they were so amazing, and I think I couldn't have done it without them. Yeah. Really, they really drove the project and they contributed, and I just feel like I just tried to support them as best I could. Like they really took charge, and I helped facilitate that, but they brought so many great ideas.
Yeah. Speaking of great ideas, what kind of strategies or tools did you implement in order to help overcome these barriers in the lab when you redesigned the curriculum?
Some of it is really small stuff, and I think we sometimes think that it's got to be this really big, innovative, cool intervention where sometimes it's the really simple things. So one thing we just noted was that the way that the lab manual was written was really dense and really jargony, and the terminology that was being used was not consistent. And so in one place, and this probably won't make any sense to anybody who's listening who's not a molecular biologist, but you can probably get the gist, is, in one place they would refer to the DNA molecules the students were working with as plasmids, and then later on they'd just be called vectors, and it would switch between different terminologies, which were still accurate, but for students this is all brand new language to them, that lack of consistency was an issue. So part of it was rewriting the lab manual to simplify it and to be really consistent and make sure that any new terms were defined really clearly. Another thing that's really critical is that I'm a big proponent of universal design for learning. And so Lauren and Sam also earned credentials in universal design for learning before we started this project. So they enrolled in an online course through this CAST organization, and they learned about universal design for learning. And one of the foundations of universal design for learning is make sure you're being very clear about what the learning goals are for students, and then you try to empower them to meet those learning goals with enough flexibility and multiple means that different learners can all achieve those goals. And so we recognized that the learning goals were not very clearly stated. We weren't really communicating very clearly to students, this is why you're doing this. This is what you're going to learn today. Here's here are the maybe 3 key things that you're going to learn in this week's lab. And those things are important because they're probably how we're going to assess you later on. And so we went through and made sure there were learning goals that were clearly defined for each lab. And then another principle of universal design is multiple means. And it basically recognizes that we all learn in different ways. We might have different learning strengths. We might have different learning preferences. And so if you look at a lab manual, it is just really dense technical language. A lot of it. It's transfer 1 microliter from this Eppendorf tube to this other Eppendorf tube, and then add a collection tube, right? And so for people who like to get information through written instruction, that's great. But some people are more visual. They want to be able to see it, or they want to be able to hear it. And so another thing we did is add more visual resources into the lab manual. And as we did that, we made sure we were following best principles for accessible documents, so that, for example, if we have a student with a sight impairment, they could still see and access that information. And so we added more visuals as well. And then Lauren had another project where she created a set of instructional videos. And again, she did such a great job of this. So she did research on best practices for inclusive instructional videos. So videos that should be accessible to everybody. And so she created these short videos. They're all under 5 minutes. And they were all on different parts of the lab that we know that sometimes students are struggling with, like the more challenging things or techniques that they might be being introduced to. And she added them. So I think she made 12 in total of these short instructional videos. And we put them all on the Meskinist page so that students before the lab, for example, if they knew they were going to use a new piece of equipment they'd never seen before, they could watch the video before lab to prepare. Or if they were in the middle of lab and they missed the instructions that the lab instructor just kind of shouted out to everybody, they could quickly watch it on their phone. Or if they're trying to figure it out at home for review before a practical test, for example, they could watch these videos. So she also created this set of videos so students had another means, that kind of back to that multiple means for universal design for learning, that students had a different way to learn other than the written instruction. So those are some of the kinds of things we're doing, and some things were around lab policies. So just things like having flexible deadlines. So if students miss something, they might have a few extra days to hand it in. Things like policies that also account for the fact that students are dealing with all kinds of challenges during the term. So when I did my undergrad, I think if you missed more than one lab, I think maybe we were allowed to miss one lab and then you got a 0. So it was really intense. Like you couldn't be late, you could not show up. So it was like, if you're sick, too bad. But, what about students who have chronic illness? And so also trying to incorporate that balance where there's a little bit of flexibility if students miss it, but also acknowledging that you still need students to go to most labs if they're going to accomplish the learning outcomes of that course. So those are the kinds of things we've looked at so far, is just trying to make sure that the learning resources are clear for students, they're accessible for all students, and then trying to provide some multiple means and flexibility in the ways that students can learn.
Wow. Yeah, I like biology and like the sciences. They've always intimidated me because I've heard stories of people being like, yeah, if I miss like one lab, I will fail the entire course. So I think it's really great that even looking at the policies and even like the small things, like you said, like just making sure the language is consistent, right. I can see having a huge benefit on not only like students' success, but also their like mental well-being as well. Like where are you at with this curriculum design? Has it been finished, or is it still in the works?
I think it probably will never be finished. I think there is always going to be opportunity to look at it and go, oh, but we could make this a little bit better. I think it's very much still a work in progress. So one of the new collaborations that I created that I'm really excited about, this one actually, is with Alexandria Chiez in the Fine Arts, Faculty of Fine Arts. She's teaching in design. And so she and I are collaborating, and we have a student, we've applied for a grant with them. So Michael Brigowich, I hope that I haven't butchered their last name in that. I've only seen it written so far. So Michael, Alexandria, and I have submitted a grant application. And if we're successful, so Michael is a design student, and of course, Alexandria is a faculty member in design. Neither of them have any science background, but they're both brilliant at design. And so the goal is actually that Michael and Alexandria and I are going to collaborate on making better visuals. So we want to do, for every experimental protocol in the lab, we want to do kind of a visual design where there's probably something like a flow chart that kind of illustrates the different equipment and pieces that our students are using. So again, to supplement those really dense written protocols, there's kind of a visual for students who learn better in that way. And so that project, Michael's going to do the designs. And so that's I think it'll be a really fun interdisciplinary project. And then what we're going to do is we're going to, again, collect student feedback on whether they found those designs useful to their learning, how they used them. Because again, if all the students go like, I didn't use it, it wasn't really helpful, then I think my prediction is it will be, but I think you always want to hear from learners. And so I think another central focus of my research is that students are experts in their own learning. students will tell you what's working for them and what isn't if you create opportunities for them to share their experiences, and we can learn from them. And so it's always about, trying something, but then asking the students, how did you use this? Did you use it at all? What would you change about it? How could we improve? And to continue to try to learn from students and to work to create a course that better serves the needs of more students. With the understanding, nothing's ever perfect, but I think we can always keep trying to make those little changes that can improve the experience for everyone.
Oh, wow. No, I said it before and I'll say it again. I think that's so important, getting the students' perspective and all of that. And I'm sure having like a design student who has no science background create a flow chart for scientific procedures will also help a lot, because if a design student with no background can understand it enough to design it, then I'm sure it'll be much easier for like people coming into the class to understand them as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, right? Because absolutely. Like they have to make a design that makes sense to them, and then I need to check it and make sure it's accurate. And so I think that interdisciplinary collaboration has this opportunity, I think, for both of us to learn and to come up with a product that I could never come up with without the design student, and the design student couldn't do without my input. And so I think that's it's really fun to bring people together from different areas, because I think often what I find is we think it's so different in science. I think, only scientists understand. But then when you get out of your bubble and you start speaking to people in other areas, some of the challenges that we're experiencing with delivering education to students are actually quite similar across different disciplines, more similar than you might expect. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to come together and learn together.
Yeah, no, I think it's so cool. And I'll be really interested to see how the collaboration with the design program
Me too.
goes.
I hope our funding gets approved.
Yeah. So I did want to talk a little bit about your Scholarship of Teaching and Learning program. And I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of background into what exactly that is.
Sure. So the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning is a discipline in and of itself. It is, I think one that's growing quite rapidly. And it is a discipline essentially made up of people who work in post-secondary and higher education in all different contexts. And the research is all focused on teaching and learning in post-secondary primarily. And so the idea behind that, again, is that it's very interdisciplinary. So it's bringing together perspectives from people in all different disciplines. They're bringing their own methodologies in as well. And we're all trying to learn about teaching and learning. And so the kinds of research done in that area are really broad and really diverse. And so Scholarship of Teaching and Learning has its own peer-reviewed journals that publish articles. It has, a diversity of different conferences, international conferences. And so there are people around the world who, like me, are not only doing their disciplinary research. So I'm a molecular biologist, so I have research in that area as well. But in addition to that, we're also doing research on teaching and learning. And it's usually people who are just giant teaching nerds, super interested in teaching and learning. And so we're also exploring how can we be better teachers? How can we better serve our students? Those kinds of questions as well.
So what are you hoping to accomplish with this program?
So first of all, just getting my biology lab moved ahead. So it's the second year molecular biology lab. It's called Biology 205, Principles of Molecular Biology. And so I think getting that lab into shape where I can look at it and go, I'm really proud of how the curriculum is designed, how it's set up. Students are having a really positive experience. They're learning the things we want them to learn. Right now, it is a good lab, but definitely I think when we diversify it, I hope that it can serve as a model for other labs. So my hope would be that once we have that lab redesigned and we've finished the other things that we want to accomplish, that we can publish about what we've done and how we've worked with students with disabilities as partners in that design. And it might serve as an example for other people who are looking at their labs, whether it's at MacEwan or it's at other universities in Canada or it's around the world, to publish in a peer-reviewed international journal while other people can look at that and learn from it. And so, always the goal with Scholarship of Teaching and Learning is I don't want to just benefit the students who happen to take my course. You want to publish it so that potentially students around the world can also benefit from the things that you've learned. And so that is, I think the first goal is just to finish that work on that biology lab so that we have a bit of a test case. But then I think, as I mentioned before, the longer term goal is that I'm really curious about how what we're learning in that biology lab connects to other experiential learning environments. And so other science labs, but also I have a collaboration right now with people in the Faculty of Nursing, in design, as I mentioned already, in sociology. I'm working with somebody in the School of Social Work. We've been talking to somebody who's involved in the work integrated learning offered through MacEwan. And so there are a lot of different experiential learning environments, and definitely, I think, getting a bigger understanding of how are these barriers that experienced in biolabs might be transferable to other environments, and how can we kind of learn together to do a better job for students.
Wow. Now, I know with your program, with your research chair and all of that, you are kind of on teaching leave right now, but you have also been awarded a Distinguished Teaching Award. And I wanted to ask, what kind of effect has that had on you?
My Distinguished Teaching Award?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I am teaching. I have one course right now. I have two in spring. So I've got my 3 courses, but not as much teaching this year for sure. Yeah, so the Distinguished Teaching Award, I got at the same time, which was, it's interesting. The Distinguished Teaching Award is such a lovely and humbling acknowledgement because, first of all, your students nominate you and your colleagues. And I think regardless of whether or not you get the award, it is a really beautiful thing where you know how busy everybody is and how busy students are and how busy your colleagues are. And so the fact that they think that you're deserving of that kind of honor and they take time out of their busy schedules to nominate you, to write letters about why they think you deserve that is, I think, such a nice pat on the back. And again, I think we don't need a pat on the back. I think I have the best job in the world, so I don't need it. But man, it feels nice.
Yeah.
It sure feels nice. Some days everybody's job is thankless. So it's really lovely to have students say, we really think you deserve this honor, and colleagues to kind of back them up. So I think that, has been just really nice. It's really nice to be acknowledged. The Distinguished Teaching Award at MacEwan is kind of seen as the Lifetime Achievement Award of teaching. It's kind of you can only get it once. So I've been teaching at MacEwan almost 19 years now. It's been a long time. And so I think too, it's probably a very nice time in my career to feel like, maybe I know what I'm doing. Maybe I'm doing okay here. So I think a lot of it is probably just that kind of warm, glowy feeling you get when people think you're deserving of something like that. I think, other than that, I think that when you get nominated for a Distinguished Teaching Award, you have to submit a really quite detailed dossier before they decide who gets it. So essentially you get nominated and then they say, you've been nominated. Are you willing to put forward a dossier for consideration? And I think even that was a really good opportunity because it had been a long time since I sat down and really spend a dedicated amount of time just writing about what I think about teaching and what I do about teaching. And reflection really is the foundation of good teaching. Taking time to step back and reflect on your own practices, to think critically about what you're doing, to think really thoughtfully about what your teaching philosophy is and how what you do is reflected in that philosophy. And so putting together the dossier, even though it was a lot of work, and I'm sure at the time I was like, this is so much work. What am I doing? I think it was really valuable for me at this stage in my career just to sit down and engage in that reflection. And so that was, I think, a valuable part of that as well. So there was, the recognition, which was so lovely and feels so good. But then there was this also, this reason to sit down and write 20 pages about what I think about teaching and what I do with my teaching.
Well, congratulations
Thank
on
you.
that as well. And speaking of reflection, I do have one last question before I let you go. And that is, what advice would you give to our listeners, whether it be students, staff, or faculty? And it doesn't have to be directly related to your research. Just like, what advice would you give somebody?
Maybe I'll tag that on. That's a big question, but maybe I'll tag that on to my comment or my response to your last question, just about reflection.
Yeah.
I think we all get really busy. We get caught up in the day-to-day, and it can be really difficult to just kind of take a break and reflect on the bigger reasons that we're here, the bigger things that we want to accomplish. And I think also the things that we have accomplished. I think all of us tend to kind of minimize our accomplishments and focus on the things that we're not doing well or that we could be doing better. I think we all feel like we're never doing enough. I think if you ask any student or any faculty member, tell me the things you think you could do better at, they would have this big, long list. And then when you ask people, like, tell me the things you're doing, like, great, you're doing a great job of, people have a harder time with that question. And so I think in part, I'd say, try to take some time to reflect on the bigger picture and the accomplishments, and, maybe go easy on yourself a little bit and remember that we're all doing our best. And I think even the fact that we're all here and we're excited about learning and we're showing up every day, even if it's not our best day, I think those are really big accomplishments. I think sometimes even with this, we get focused on these big awards and that seems like a big deal. But I think the smaller battles where you just come in every day and get through the day, even when it's a rough day, are big accomplishments too. And I know students, for a fact, are really hard on themselves. I think students put, a lot of pressure on themselves. I think students we know are dealing with a huge mental health crisis in post-secondary. So there's a lot of challenges out there. And I think we can forget to maybe give ourselves a pat on the back and remember that we're doing a lot of good things.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. I'm excited to see where your research goes.
Yeah, me too.
Well, that's all we have for today's episode of Research Recasted. If you want to support this podcast, you can visit Research Recasted on your favorite podcast platform to find new episodes every 2 weeks. Also, don't forget to check us out on Instagram at Research Recasted, where you can leave us a like, give us a follow, or send us any follow-up questions you have from today's episode. This has been Research Recasted, the Knowledge Mobilization Podcast, brought to you by the Faculty of Fine Arts and Communications and the Office of Research Services at MacEwan University.